LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the March 21st edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the 13 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows of the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. I am going to be covering the topic you see in the title, or two topics really. Ketanji Brown Jackson's nomination hearing started today, her nomination hearing week, I guess, started today, and I'll be covering that. And I'm going to do things a little differently. I'm going to show the clips on that topic first, the breaking news, because that ongoing topic, and then I'm going to do the news summaries from all five of the big corporate outlets, followed by a couple newsmaker clips on Ukraine. All the news summaries, at least at the beginning of the program, were almost exclusively on the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. Not a lot of change in that topic since I covered it the last few weeks. The Russian invasion is kind of stalled, so they are escalating on the brutality, the civilian areas that are getting targeted, and I'll talk about all that when I get to those clips. But for my political comedy, I talked about one of my claims to fame when this, right before this whole Ukraine invasion by Russia started, or right after, I think, when Fox News had Condoleezza Rice on, and I talked about one of my claims to fame being that I actually took a course in grand strategy at Yale when I got my history degree and kind of focused on modern military history. And in this grand strategy course, the professor didn't actually teach the course. He brought in a guest lecturer every week for this very small, like 20 student junior seminar, and it also had some graduate students in it. And one week it was Condoleezza Rice, and so she was a Stanford Sovietologist at the time, and I talked to her about the NATO versus the Soviet Union, which is what I was writing my paper on. It was like my week to help question the guest lecturer because it was my paper topic, and so I have some background in that. And one of the reasons I am qualified to do this live stream, not that anyone ever asked my qualifications anyway, but this week I have two qualifications. I mean, other than being a lawyer, which gives me some qualification to talk about a Supreme Court nominee, but I have a couple more claims to fame coming up. Well, there's one about, the Brett Kavanaugh thing, which I'll talk about that when I get to the Brett Kavanaugh related clips. But for my political comedy, I'm actually going all the way back to the beginning of the month of March, when right after the State of the Union, Fox News political commentator, I guess, Tucker Carlson, I don't know, he is kind of a white supremacist, kind of a fascist, he is very popular though on Fox News. And he had a commentary about Joe Biden's State of the Union speech, where he mentioned Ketanji Brown Jackson and made a demand, which I because of one of my claims to fame that I'll talk about after I show the clip, I am particularly well suited to respond to. I don't know if you've seen this going around, but here is the full commentary from Tucker Carlson back on March 2nd about his demand regarding the nomination of Ketanji Brown Jackson over here.
Then Biden went on to mention someone called Ketanji Brown Jackson. Now, that's not a name most Americans know, because Ketanji Brown Jackson has been an appellate judge for less than a year. But Joe Biden assured us she is, quote, one of our top legal minds. Watch.
We all know one of the most serious constitutional responsibility a president has is nominating someone to serve on the United States Supreme Court. As I did 4 days ago, I've nominated the Circuit Court of Appeals, Ketanji Brown Jackson, one of our nation's top legal minds.
So is Ketanji Brown Jackson, a name that even Joe Biden has trouble pronouncing, one of the top legal minds in the entire country? We certainly hope so. Biden's right. Appointing her is one of his gravest constitutional duties. So it might be time for Joe Biden to let us know what Ketanji Brown Jackson's LSAT score was. What the hell did she do in the LSATs? Why wouldn't he tell us that? That would settle the question conclusively as to whether she's a once-in-a-generation legal talent, the next learned hand. It would seem like Americans in a democracy have a right to know that and much more before giving her a lifetime appointment, but we didn't hear that. And that was just one of many things that Joe Biden left unsaid last night. He alluded, for example, to rising crime.
And I won't subject you to any more, but I am in a special position to respond to this criticism because I actually got a perfect score on the LSAT. Back when I took it in the 1980s, a perfect score was a 48, and I'm really good at taking tests. I took the Stanley Kaplan prep course, so I learned how to do those logic games. I actually I have sort of a natural talent for logic and logic games and those kinds of things. So I got a perfect score in the LSAT, but I don't think it means that it would settle conclusively whether I'm a once-in-a-generation legal mind or that what was that all about? I mean, it seems like some sort of like, because, you know, a lot of those standardized tests tend to they tend to be racially normed, or they have like a bias against people of various different ethnicities, and I don't know if that's what he was trying to say. Like he thought, oh, maybe she didn't do well on the LSAT, and no one even mentioned that at the hearing today, except the Senator Hirono from Hawaii just mentioned it to like make a joke out of it about how, because the thing is that all the LSAT is supposed to even predict is how well you do in law school, and even to that it doesn't even do that well. And I mean, I did pretty well in law school. I didn't do perfectly in law school, like a perfect LSAT score, and how you do in law school, and then how you do in all the jobs she's been, you know, Ketanji Brown Jackson has been working. I talked about how she's a former public defender, the first one ever on the Supreme Court a couple weeks ago, and how that was a huge win for diversity on the court, because some huge percentage of judges are former prosecutors, not former defenders. And anyway, I thought that was ridiculous, and I just wanted to point, as someone who actually got a perfect score in the LSAT, I think that I am qualified to say that Tucker Carlson's an idiot. But having done that, I now want to get to a few clips of different senators talking about the Ketanji Brown Jackson nomination. Like I said, I'm going a little out of my usual order. I'm not going to get to the news summaries now. I'm going to show you Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, followed by Republican Senator John Barrasso and Republican Senator Ben Sasse. Asked for first, Mitch McConnell's being questioned by CBS's Margaret Brennan, then John Barrasso by ABC's George Stephanopoulos, and then Ben Sasse by Fox News' Trace Gallagher, all bringing up how Brett Kavanaugh and or Clarence Thomas were somehow mistreated, but they're not going to mistreat Ketanji Brown Jackson. And that makes me very upset, because one of my other claims to fame is I lived in the same freshman dorm building at Yale on Old Campus in 1983, 1984, from the fall of 83 to the spring of 84. I lived in the same freshman dorm building as Brett Kavanaugh, and I happen to know that he's a big liar about his drinking at Yale, and I happen to know that the allegations against him were not well investigated. In fact, the White House and the Republican-controlled Senate stopped the FBI from talking to witnesses that could have shown he was lying to the Senate during his confirmation hearings. But I will talk about that a little more after we see three Republican senators claim that Brett Kavanaugh and or Clarence Thomas got a raw deal, and they get no pushback from any. It's not just the Fox News Trace Gallagher. Well, Fox News's Trace Gallagher goes even one step further and like gives his own opinion that Brett Kavanaugh didn't get due process. You'll see that in the third clip. But even Margaret Brennan in this first clip, a woman, I'm pretty sure Margaret Brennan is a woman, and she does not push back at all against what Mitch McConnell says about Brett Kavanaugh in the clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
I want to ask you about what is about to get underway this week. You've said President Biden's nominee to the Supreme Court, Judge Brown Jackson, is very intelligent, clearly qualified, and highly likely to be confirmed. You personally have voted against her before. Are you inclined to vote for her this time?
You know, we had a very good conversation in my office, and I asked her, you know, typically these Supreme Court nominees of both parties have never answered any of the questions. What they typically say is that's something that might come before me, and I don't want to prejudge how I might actually vote. But I asked her to defend the court. Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Justice Breyer both publicly opposed court packing. That is, trying to increase the number of court members in order to get an outcome you like. That would have been an easy thing for her to do to defend the integrity of the court. She wouldn't do that. Yeah. So in the meantime, the committee will ask her all the tough questions. I haven't made a final decision as to how I'm going to vote.
You haven't made a final decision, but you're open to be persuaded? I mean, this is a historic nominee.
I'm going to listen to the evidence. I'm going to listen to the hearings. And by the way, she'll be treated much better than Democrats have typically treated Republican nominees like Clarence Thomas and Brett Kavanaugh. It'll be a respectful deep dive into her record, which I think is entirely appropriate for a lifetime appointment.
So you are open to voting for her then? Okay. We'll see.
I'm willing to listen to the testimony. That's why we have hearings.
Okay. I want to ask you as well about COVID aid.
And CBS, to their credit, did a lot of coverage of the upcoming COVID surge, the so-called BA2 Omicron subvariant. If you go down to the link in the video description to CBS News Face the Nation under sources, you can see the entire, they did an entire report on that from Europe explaining how it's spreading there. And it's also doing, Omicron is spreading in China. And that's an important story that I'm not really talking about but this week. But I get the feeling in the coming weeks I'm going to get a chance to talk about it again. But despite Margaret Brennan covering COVID, which wasn't covered on all 5 of the news programs, I don't think she did a good job following up about Brett Kavanaugh and Mitch McConnell just slipping that in. But it seems like a talking point that all the Republicans are using. In fact, they all did use it on the Sunday morning news analysis shows, as you'll see ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. George Stephanopoulos himself was anchoring this week, and he had on Senator John Barrasso, who slipped in the same talking point about Brett Kavanaugh and got no follow-up over in this clip.
Just left off in those attacks from Senator Hawley this week. You met with Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson earlier this week, and you said, you didn't suggest how you were going to vote, but you said this should not be a process of character assassination. Is that what Senator Hawley was doing?
Well, these hearings are going to, and the whole process is going to be fair, respectful, and thorough. I did meet with her, clearly very intelligent. We talked about judicial philosophy. I talked about Justice Scalia, that it's the Constitution, a legal document, not a living document. We had a very good meeting. I'm less concerned about her statements than I am about Chuck Schumer's statements. He said she's going to rule with empathy. A judge ought to be making decisions based on the law as written, not the way they feel about it. So he also said, check her record, and going through the record, there are some concerns that people have about her being perceived as soft on crime. That's all going to come out with the hearings, but they're going to be respectful, they're going to be thorough, and they're going to be fair, George.
But do you think Senator Hawley's attacks were fair?
Well, he's going to have his opportunity to question the judge, as will all of the members of the committee. The last time we had a hearing with Kavanaugh, he was accused of being a serial rapist on no evidence whatsoever. So I think that we're going to have a fair process and a respectful process, unlike what the Democrats did to Justice Kavanaugh.
You also heard Senator Durbin on gas prices and inflation.
And there you see, following up on gas prices and inflation, not following up on Senator John Barrasso just making the totally false claim that Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh in his confirmation hearings was accused of being a serial rapist with absolutely no evidence. Well, he was accused of sexual assault by a woman who came and testified under oath, Christine Blasey Ford, and that was something that supposedly happened in high school. I didn't go to high school with Brett Kavanaugh. I don't know anything about that. But he was also accused of sexual assault by Deborah Ramirez in his freshman year of college at Yale. And I do know something about that, having lived in the same dorm with Brett Kavanaugh and Deborah Ramirez, because we were in the same residential college. We lived in Lawrence Hall on Old Campus in the fall of '83 and the spring of '84, as I mentioned earlier, and there was plenty of evidence. She had over a dozen witnesses who were going to corroborate her story, including Brett Kavanaugh's freshman roommate, Jim Roche. You know, Brett Kavanaugh lived in the basement of entryway D. I lived in the basement of entryway A, so we were all connected through the bathrooms. And I actually went through there because one of my best friends in freshman year was up at the top of entryway D. And there was even this weird roommate switch between them. And so I knew a lot about the drinking problems that were going on in Brett Kavanaugh's room. And so did his freshman roommate, who was never interviewed by the FBI. Brett Kavanaugh actually, over the years, had 7 FBI background checks. And his freshman college roommate, Jim Roche, never interviewed. So there was plenty of evidence, despite what John Barrasso said. And the worst reaction to this Republican talking point that Brett Kavanaugh was mistreated by the Senate and was over on Fox News, where Trace Gallagher was in as the host of Fox News Sunday this week, and he had Republican Senator Ben Sasse on, who made the same talking point about mistreatment of Brett Kavanaugh. And not only did Trace Gallagher not follow up like Margaret Brennan and George Stephanopoulos in the previous clips, but he actually gave his own opinion on the side of the falsehood, which I will talk about a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
I want to move on, if I can. The SCOTUS Supreme Court nomination hearings for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson begin tomorrow. Your colleague on the Judiciary Committee, Josh Hawley, said this of her time on the U.S. Sentencing Commission, quoting here, "Judge Jackson has a pattern of letting child porn offenders off the hook for their appalling crimes. Both as a judge and as a policymaker, the White House responded," quoting again, "overwhelming majority of Jackson's cases involving child sex crimes, the sentences Judge Jackson imposed were consistent with or above what the government or U.S. probation recommended." Where do you stand on this, Senator?
Yeah, so Supreme Court justices get lifetime tenure, and before that happens, there needs to be a vigorous, rigorous vetting of their records, and there are things in Judge Jackson's record that are troubling. I'm glad we're having the confirmation hearing starting tomorrow afternoon. I hope, tomorrow morning, I guess. I hope Judge Jackson will be very forthcoming and transparent. The American people and the United States Senate in our advise and consent responsibilities need to understand this, and there are things in this record that are troubling.
Yeah, I'm just curious, do you think there's going to be the acrimony that we have seen in some of these past nomination processes? Not Brett Kavanaugh, because that was over the top, but it seems to me like a lot of Republicans have kind of withheld their opinion in this because it really doesn't change the balance of the court. Still 6-3. She's a liberal. Your final thoughts?
The idiocracy version of Senate confirmation hearings for the Supreme Court have been getting stupider and stupider since the Bork hearings in the 1980s. So the stuff that Democrats tried to do to Brett Kavanaugh and his wife and his kids were just unconscionably wicked. But it's a part of a pattern that's been going on for 30 years. I want us to vet Judge Jackson's judicial philosophy. I don't want us to attack her as a human. I want us to be having a debate about what her judicial philosophy is, because when you go on the court, if you get lifetime tenure, it's because you don't confuse yourself with a super legislator, and we need to know that that judicial modesty there is there in their responsibility.
And certainly Judge Kavanaugh did not get due process, which he deserved. Senator, thank you for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Trace.
Did not get due process. Brett Kavanaugh did not get due process. They only had one of his accusers testify, Christine Blasey Ford, and they let him come and testify afterwards, after he had heard everything she had to say, and he had his whole weird meltdown that was totally showed he lacked judicial temperament. He lied about his drinking at Yale also. That was ridiculous, and that is, because he was in this fraternity. There were almost no fraternities at Yale back in 1983, 84, and he rushed the Deeks, DKE, and you could not go through that rush without getting blackout drunk. The DKE rush, that was evident for everyone on campus to see, is on what is it called, tap night or rush week or whatever, where they had their pledges paraded around campus every night, blackout drunk, and Brett Kavanaugh claimed he never got blackout drunk, and but it's not just that. It's, as I said before that last clip, the FBI was stopped by the White House and the Republican Senate back when Brett Kavanaugh was nominated from investigating a lot of the witnesses who could have proved that he lied. They did talk to Deborah Ramirez, who said that she was sexually assaulted at a party by Brett Kavanaugh, though she was also drunk, and so she had some memory problems. But there were a bunch of other people there who also could have corroborated her story, and they were never interviewed. And like I said, Jim Roche, his freshman college roommate down in the basement room and entryway D of Lawrence Hall, he was never interviewed. There's a Slate article. I put a link down in the video description to this Slate article by Jim Roche, the Brett Kavanaugh's freshman college roommate, and it's titled, "I was Brett Kavanaugh's college roommate. He lied under oath about his drinking and terms in his yearbook." That whole, I don't know why Republicans, I guess they supposedly won some Senate seats based on the mistreatment of Brett Kavanaugh in the 2018 midterms, and that's why they keep bringing up this false narrative that Brett Kavanaugh was mistreated. But Brett Kavanaugh skated through those hearings. If the FBI had done a real background investigation, talked to his freshman college roommate, Jim Roche, talked to the corroborating witnesses for Deborah Ramirez, things could have gone a lot worse, and he probably would have had to withdraw his nomination instead of going on that rant meltdown that somehow got him on the Supreme Court. That was ridiculous. So one of the things that I find most disturbing about the recent history of Supreme Court nominations is the way that Brett Kavanaugh lied his way onto the Supreme Court, but it's turned into this Republican talking point that he didn't get due process and he was mistreated, and anyway, it's just ridiculous. So that is what I wanted to talk about at the beginning of the live stream. That's why I've gone kind of out of order and put that topic at the beginning before any of the news summaries, but now I actually want to get to the 5 news summaries, which all focus on the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine, and I'm going to take them from the longest one to the shortest one, starting with, I don't know, this might be the best one. Oh, before I get to that, I almost used this as my political comedy clip. I delayed the show a little today because I watched all of the Ketanji Brown Jackson hearings day one, which was just a bunch of senators making their opening statements, and then she made her opening statement. And I don't know if she studied the Brett Kavanaugh hearings as closely as I have because of my weird connection to living in that freshman dorm building, but remember how the freshman roommate, Brett Kavanaugh's freshman roommate, Jim Roche, wrote an article saying he lied under oath. Well, Ketanji Brown Jackson actually brought her freshman roommate from Harvard to help introduce her and even thanked her college roommates. Is this a dig at Brett Kavanaugh? You let me know what you think. This is like 17 seconds of her opening statement today over here.
I also have incredible friends. 3 of my college roommates came here today to support me. And I have so many other boosters from Miami Palmetto Senior High School, Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law School, and all throughout my personal and professional life.
I don't know. Was that a subtle dig at Kavanaugh? How, like, the people who knew her in high school and college are here to say she's not a sexual assaulter or whatever. But anyway, I had to include that before. Now I'm getting to the news summaries. I was about to introduce them. They're all pretty much on Ukraine. I have them from longest to shortest. The longest, possibly best one is from George Stephanopoulos and Ian Pannell, or Ian Pannell, I guess. They're reporter in Kyiv. And I will talk about that news summary a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. Come on the air this morning. The war in Ukraine appears to be a stalemate. The Institute for the Study of War has concluded that Ukraine has defeated the initial Russian campaign, with forces stalled outside Kyiv and other major cities. But in the face of resistance, Putin is escalating his brutal attacks, drawing new charges of war crimes. President Zelenskyy is both promising victory and pleading for direct peace talks with Putin. The war enters its 4th week with more killing and more questions. No clarity at all on how the conflict ends or what the ultimate cost will be. Our senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell starts us off from Kyiv, which could soon face the biggest urban battle since World War II. Good morning, Ian.
Yeah, good morning, George. It has been another week of death, destruction and displacement in Ukraine. In the south and east, there have been some small Russian advances, and many cities are encircled and they're being heavily bombarded. I think Mariupol in particular appears to be at risk of falling. But in many other areas, Putin's land invasion appears to have largely stalled for now. And in his hubris, he seems to have totally underestimated his enemy and overestimated the power of his own military. 25 days since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, and Putin's war is running into trouble. Suffering heavy losses and stalled operations on all fronts, Russian troops spent the 4th week of their offensive targeting military infrastructure and densely populated residential areas with increasingly heavy aerial bombardment. Civilians pummeled by Russian missiles day after day, with more than 3 million Ukrainians now refugees, half of them children. Tatiana and her 1-year-old baby were in bed when their apartment block in Kyiv was blown up this week. I heard a very powerful explosion. My baby started yelling. I've never heard a cry like that, she says. I looked up and saw a huge fireball. I grabbed my baby and ran.
This is exactly what indiscriminate Russian bombardment actually looks like. An apartment block struck by a missile at 5 in the morning, and you can see the incredible damage that it's done.
Ukrainian officials confirming 23 killed outside of Kharkiv Thursday. The bombs aimed at a school and community centre. 10 people were killed just standing in line for bread in the northern city of Chernihiv, according to the governor there. But it's the besieged city of Mariupol that's been the hardest hit. Russian bombs razing this drama theatre to the ground. More than 1,000 people were sheltering there, and the word children was clearly written in Russian on the ground. Amid the setbacks around Kyiv, Russian forces have made small advances in eastern and southern Ukraine.
It says something very strong about how the Ukrainians are defending their territory and how weak the Russians are and how ineffective their air force has been.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy taking his role as a wartime president in an extraordinary appeal to the U.S. Congress.
Remember Pearl Harbor. Remember September the 11th, when evil tried to turn your cities, independent territories, in battlefields. Our country experience the same every day.
Within hours, Biden unveiling $800 million worth of new military aid to Ukraine, a $1 billion total in just 1 week. For the first time, President Biden offering his harshest assessment yet.
I think he is a war criminal.
In Moscow, though, it's another reality. Vladimir Putin on Friday staging a mass pro-war rally in Moscow. This week he claimed the invasion is unfolding successfully, but the costs are mounting for Putin. The Russian president acknowledging rising costs, rising inflation and unemployment. And although ceasefire negotiations continued this week, there are mixed signals as to how much they're achieving. The fear is that without a workable off-ramp, Putin may double down and turn to even more extreme steps.
We believe that Moscow may be setting the stage to use a chemical weapon and then falsely blame Ukraine to justify escalating its attacks on the Ukrainian people.
Next week, the president travelling to Belgium for a NATO summit where he and world leaders will discuss the ongoing conflict. The risks of other nations being drawn in are growing, and the week ahead feels a critical and dangerous moment in Putin's war in Ukraine.
Well, given how badly this campaign has gone, it does raise a question of whether Putin is prepared to moderate his war goals. But there was nothing in those speeches that he made this week to suggest he's at that point yet. And given the deployment of these longer-range missiles and ever more destructive and indiscriminate firepower, this is starting to look like it could become a protracted war of attrition. George?
Ian, Pannell, thanks very much. Let's bring in the Senate Democratic Whip now, Dick Durbin. Senator Durbin, thank you for joining us this morning.
And I don't have a clip of Dick Durbin, although I do have, you saw John Barrasso responding to Dick Durbin and his talk about Ketanji Brown Jackson in a previous clip I showed. But I thought that was a fairly good report. It covered a lot of the lack of news in the last week, really. I mean, the war hasn't changed that much. The Russians are still stalled. They've still increased their brutality. There are a couple things like the hypersonic missiles and the new instances of civilian targeting. There are, it looks like maybe the breakthrough, or when there might be some big news when I do my live stream next Monday. We can talk about Biden's trip to this NATO EU summit and then going to Poland, and I don't know, I almost get the feeling he may do like a secret trip into Ukraine, even though they say he won't, but I guess we'll find that out by next week. But anyway, let's juxtapose that news summary with the other four, or well, there are three actual news organizations and then Fox News, but the next one is actually NBC News Meet the Press, and this is Chuck Todd with the NBC News correspondent Richard Engel, and you compare that to George Stephanopoulos and Ian Pannell in the previous news summary. They cover a lot of the same facts, and it's kind of covering a war that has stalled, so that's a little difficult to cover, but there's always new events, and they cover a lot of the same news events from the last week in the clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
And a good Sunday morning. With much of their advance stalled, Russian forces continue to turn their guns and missiles on civilians. In recent days, they've hit a theater that was clearly identified as filled with children. Hundreds remain unaccounted for. Russians have bombed apartment buildings in city after city to spread terror, even targeting bread lines and food storage facilities with the clear intention of starving the populace into submission. These are civilian attacks. They're not accidents. Overnight, Russia bombed an art school in Mariupol. 400 people had been hiding there. President Biden has gone to the extraordinary step of calling Vladimir Putin a war criminal. And on Friday, the White House says Mr. Biden warned China's President Xi Jinping of significant repercussions if China decides to aid Russia either financially or militarily. But Vladimir Putin now apparently accepts that Volodymyr Zelenskyy is the leader of the Ukrainian people and will remain so even after this war. It's a big concession, but he's still refusing to meet with Zelenskyy one-on-one, at least for now. So does Putin even want a peace deal, or does he want to flatten Ukraine so nobody can have it? We're going to begin this morning with a report from Kyiv, which remains under Ukrainian control despite the Russian onslaught, with our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel. And Richard, it seems as if this was the week that Russia amped up missile strikes. Are they no longer trying to use a ground invasion to take over Kyiv?
Here in Kyiv, the mood has changed significantly. People are coming out onto the streets. They're feeling much more confident. But everything in this city feels like it's in a bit of suspended reality. Nobody is working. The economy has more or less stopped. Nobody's paying taxes. People aren't making plans for the future. They're just making weapons in their homes while the Russian offensive is paused. But the expectation is that Russia is just refitting, rearming, regrouping, and that it plans to hit this city and other cities with even more ferocity as it brings in heavier weapons. And Russia is already starting to use heavier weapons. It used the hypersonic missile, which caught a lot of people's attention. But the concern here is that it could bring in its heavy artillery pieces that would do the most damage. And this is typical Russian military operating procedure. When it hits a wall, it brings in bigger hammers to smash through that wall. But here in Kyiv, for the time being, they are seeing something of a respite and also using this time to refit and stock up on supplies.
So if it's possible that Putin has decided maybe he can't get Kyiv and he wants to at least keep what he has or try to, make some incremental gains in the south and these, what do these peace talks look like? And who's now the best mediator?
Turkey is emerging far and away as the clearest mediator with President Erdogan. He has a relationship with President Putin. He's a NATO member, so he's trusted by both sides. But he has also had strained relations with the United States, which could help him with Putin. So he's clearly emerged as the interlocutor. And so far, what Turkey is saying is that Putin and Russia do seem to be willing to make some sort of deal, that it would involve denazification, whatever that means, potentially just a generic statement from Ukraine that it rejects all forms of extremism, that it would involve neutrality, which President Zelenskyy has already more or less agreed to, that he won't join NATO. But it could also involve territorial concessions, particularly in the south, particularly around Mariupol. And that, so far, seems to be the biggest sticking point.
And that might be a bridge too far for Zelenskyy right now. Richard Engel in Kyiv for us. Richard, thank you. Clint Watts has been studying the war, deconstructing Russia's military strategy for us here at NBC News. He joins me now.
So, yeah, then NBC goes to military analyst, which is one of the things you've seen in the last few weeks, that they go first from someone in Kiev to military analyst. Everyone started with someone in Kiev, except for Fox News, and I can't really criticize them for that because they had two journalists killed and one seriously wounded in Kyiv last week. Remember, Benjamin Hall, who did the report last week, was seriously wounded. Apparently he's still okay and he's on his way back, but the cameraman and the local journalist / producer who was with him, they both were killed when their vehicle took some kind of fire. I don't know where it was from, but yeah, that so can't criticize Fox News for that. But they did still start with their correspondent in Washington, D.C. to make it more political, which I will criticize them for when I get to that news summary after CBS News Face the Nation, which comes next. They also started with their anchor, Margaret Brennan, then went to their reporter in Kyiv, Charlie D'Agata. I actually think even though the CBS News Face the Nation news summary is shorter than the last two, it has more of an emotional impact. Maybe that's why Margaret Brennan at the beginning says some of these scenes may be too intense for some viewers or whatever it is she says, but I mean, they all cover pretty much the same facts about, President Biden has now called Vladimir Putin a war criminal. The bombing of that, what was it, a drama school where they put like the word kids in Russian outside the school and they still got bombed, and the way the invasion has stalled and Russian brutality has increased. And I think they mostly mentioned the hypersonic missiles. But anyway, I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch Margaret Brennan and Charlie D'Agata summarize the same news in a slightly different way on CBS News' Face the Nation yesterday over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. There is no end in sight, no off-ramp for the Russians, and seemingly no serious movement in negotiations for a ceasefire in the now 25 days long war in Ukraine. As we come on the air, the scenes of death and devastation in the port city of Mariupol are abhorrent, and the city is on the verge of being completely under Russian control. We've got a lot to get to today, and we want to begin with the latest news from Ukraine, and we'd like to warn you some of the images you will see in this broadcast could be disturbing. Charlie D'Agata has been in Ukraine since before the Russians invaded, and he reports today from Kyiv. Charlie?
Good morning, Margaret. The horrific situation unfolding in Mariupol took an even darker turn this morning. Ukrainian officials have accused Russian forces of bombing a school where hundreds were taking shelter and now claim residents are being forcibly taken to Russia. They lie where they died. So many bodies all over Mariupol, some buried right on the spot. Drone footage reveals the extraordinary destruction after weeks of relentless bombing, whole neighborhoods in ruins in what human rights groups describe as a catastrophe. City council officials say Russian soldiers are forcibly deporting several thousand residents to Russian territory, like this refugee center in the Russian port city of Taganrog. Resident Lyudmila Slivka said they didn't have much choice. The Russian soldiers gave us 10 minutes, saying, if you want to live, go. Her husband Victor said the whole of Mariupol is gone. There's nothing left alive in there. In a late-night address, President Vladimir Zelenskyy condemned Russia's constant bombardment, saying the terror inflicted onto this peaceful city will be remembered for centuries. Hospitals have been overwhelmed, with exhausted medics unable to keep up with the amount of civilian casualties coming through the doors. The civilian death toll is mounting as fighting rages in multiple regions across Ukraine. On the outskirts of Kyiv, Ukrainian troops are stuck in a brutal back-and-forth battle to keep the Russian offensive at bay. The capital's defense systems have intercepted some incoming missiles, but others have struck right in the heart of the city. Intentionally targeting civilians or not doing enough to protect them constitutes a war crime. And in this residential neighborhood in the capital and other cities, there's plenty of growing evidence. As Russia has stepped up its air campaign, the Russian Defense Ministry now claims it fired a second hypersonic missile since the invasion began, with Ukrainian forces having fought Russian troops to a standstill in some areas, a show of force that Russia still holds the upper hand in firepower. With growing international pressure unable to stop the fighting, the Ukrainian government has now urged China to join Western countries in condemning what it calls Russian barbarism. Margaret?
Charlie D'Agata, thank you. The United Nations Human Rights Office today said that at least 902 civilians have been killed in Ukraine. That number is likely much higher. Joining us now is the Secretary of Defense, retired General Lloyd Austin, just back from a trip.
So you can't really criticize them for going to the Secretary of Defense after their news report, and they did have a reporter in Kyiv, just like ABC and NBC did, and went as close as they could to the action with their reporter in the top of the news report for the Sunday morning news analysis show. And like I said, I can't criticize Fox News in this next news summary for not doing that, because they did just take some casualties, but they have someone in Lviv, which is in the west part of Ukraine. They have someone in Poland, but they don't go to either of those. They go to Mark Meredith in Washington, D.C., because they are, if nothing else, political. Because Fox News is not a journalistic it's not a news organization. It's a propaganda outlet for the Republican Party, which is what Roger Ailes created it to be. If you read The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman, that book that's right over there, if you want to know more about that. But that last news summary from CBS had, a lot of the same stuff: war crimes, targeting of civilians, hypersonic missiles, peace talks, which may or may not be creating any peace. But anyway, I think that they can all be, all of the last three can be grouped together and differentiated from what you see from Fox News, even though, this is one of their most straight news shows. But here's Trace Gallagher and Mark Meredith summarizing the same news. You heard, I think it was Charlie Daggett in that last report talking about inflation in Russia, but here it's all about the inflation in the United States. You can tell me what you think of this report compared to the last three and the next one, but let's watch it together and talk about it a little more after we watch it together over here.
Again from Fox News in Washington, Russian forces are pushing deeper into Ukraine, attacking cities, but facing continued resistance. They have not yet claimed full control of a major city, but they have cut off at least one. Ukraine's president is repeating his calls to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin. And this week, the United Nations said at least 847 civilians have been killed and nearly 1,400 wounded. The real toll is thought to be much higher. In a moment, we will speak with a key Republican member of the Intelligence Committee, Senator Ben Sasse. But we begin this morning with Team Fox coverage. Jonathan Hunt in Lviv, which saw its first Russian strikes this week. Aisha Hasni along the border between Ukraine and Poland. She has the very latest on the humanitarian crisis there. But first, Mark Meredith at the White House with the very latest on the president's plans to meet with allies in Europe. Mark, good morning to you.
Trace, this week President Biden is expected to strongly reaffirm America's commitment to the NATO alliance. He's also expected to urge Russia to pull back as the death toll and humanitarian crisis in Ukraine really appears to grow worse by the hour. President Biden will meet world leaders at NATO headquarters Thursday to strategize over how best to respond to Russia's invasion and its growing threat to security across Eastern Europe.
Let there be no doubt, no uncertainty, no question. America stands with the forces of freedom.
As the White House spends billions on military assistance to Ukraine, the president is calling out Vladimir Putin directly.
I think he is a war criminal.
The president is also warning countries not to help Russia amid the fallout of unprecedented sanctions. During a call Friday with China's president, the U.S. threatened to impose punishments for assisting Russia. However, officials are not publicly saying what those consequences may be.
China has to make a decision for themselves about where they want to stand and how they want the history books to look at them and view their actions.
Meantime, pressure is building on the White House to bring surging inflation and rising gas prices under control. Gas prices have come down just slightly from their record highs earlier this month. Tomorrow, we expect the president to outline where the economy stands when he meets with some CEOs right here in D.C. Trace.
And we're going to talk about that. Mark Meredith reporting from the White House. Mark, thank you. Now let's turn to our chief correspondent, Jonathan Hunt. He's on the ground in western Ukrainian, the city of Lviv. Jonathan.
Western Ukraine, I think is what Trace Gallagher meant there. And why? I mean, that's the one reporter they have in Ukraine. Why didn't they go to him first? That is my criticism of Fox News. I can't criticize them for not having someone in Kyiv after what happened last week, but why go to Mark Meredith first so that he could focus on Biden's political problems with gas prices and inflation rather than the inflation caused in Russia by the sanctions that you heard reported in the previous news summaries. Now, CNN State of the Union, like I've been talking about for the last few weeks, has done something different than they usually do, where the 6 a.m. Pacific show that I watch is then just repeated as a recorded show at 9 a.m. Pacific. Well, they repeat some parts of it. They re-show some of the interviews, but they're actually doing a live show at 9 a.m. Pacific, which I guess is 6 a.m. Eastern, of course. But the one thing I don't understand is Jake Tapper always starts the show by saying, "What is the State of the Union this week?" And he does it for the early show, but not for the later show. We don't need to. What about the people who don't wake up at 6 a.m. and don't record it like I do? Don't they need to know the State of the Union? So I've been providing that service where I'm going to show you the first 30 seconds of the earlier version where he says what the State of the Union is, but then I'll show you the most updated news summary after that. But here's that first 30 seconds over. So you want to know the State of the Union? Jake tells you every week. Here it is.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is wondering if this NATO summit is more about images than solutions. President Biden will travel to Europe this week to meet with allies for a series of critical gatherings, an emergency NATO summit, a special session of the European Council, and a meeting of the G7. But beyond a show of resolve, it remains unclear what, if anything, these Western leaders might announce to stop Putin's slaughter of the Ukrainian people. On the ground, the Russian brutality has increased.
So yeah, I guess the State of our Union this week is wondering if Biden's trip to Europe is just going to be a photo op, is basically that. I mean, we can't fault Jake Tapper there for not being critical of a Democratic president, because the actual State of the Union this week is wondering if it's all just for show. But he doesn't say it when he comes back 3 hours later, but 3 hours later he does have more breaking news. Fareed Zakaria on his program on CNN, in between the two State of the Union programs, interviewed Vladimir Zelenskyy, who, I don't know, I guess he's been hearing a lot that some of the things, like the no-fly zone he's been asking for, are going to, that people don't want to give him what he's asking for because it might start World War III. Was like the main topic of my live stream last week, how to stop the Russian invasion of Ukraine without starting World War III. And so I guess Vladimir Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine, has come up with this idea that, well, maybe I should say, if I don't get what I want, that's going to start World War III. Or, I don't know, that's kind of my take on the interview he did with Fareed Zakaria that's excerpted in the State of the Union news summary that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington. Welcome to a special live edition of State of the Union. We begin this morning with breaking news and a special CNN exclusive. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy spoke with our own Fareed Zakaria, saying the Russians are launching indiscriminate attacks on Ukraine and explaining why he wants to negotiate with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Take a listen.
I'm ready for negotiations with him. I was ready over the last 2 years. And I think that without negotiations, we cannot end this war. I think that we have to use any format, any chance in order to have a possibility of negotiating, possibility of talking to Putin. But if these attempts fail, that would mean that this is a third world war.
This renewed call to negotiate comes as President Biden prepares to travel to Europe this week to meet with European allies for a series of critical gatherings. But beyond a show of resolve, it remains unclear what, if anything, those leaders might announce to stop Putin's slaughter of the Ukrainian people. On the ground in Ukraine, the Russian brutality has only increased. Overnight, we learned an art school being used as a shelter in the Ukrainian town of Mariupol had been bombed by Russian forces. According to the city council, there were about 400 people sheltering there, and people remain trapped in the rubble. Another horrifying claim, local authorities say that 11 days ago, a Russian tank opened fire on a nursing home in Kremeny, killing 56 elderly residents of the nursing home, and that 15 other residents of the care home had been abducted and taken to Russian-controlled territory. Joining us now to discuss, the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas.
So you see at the very end of that clip how they have the U.S. Ambassador to the UN interview with the word live in the corner? That's not a live interview. That's pre-recorded from 3 hours earlier. They say it's a special live version, but they actually show pre-recorded interviews. So I would definitely criticize State of the... What, they should take that word live out of the corner when they're showing pre-recorded interviews. That's what I say, but I don't know. Is that too nitpicky? You can let me know what you think in the comments section. I've been reading your live comments along the way. By the way, I saw Lulu Girl and Tom Trask both gave me super chat contributions. Matthew gave one even before I started, so I appreciate all of that financial support for the program, especially because I saw I've been demonetized again for, I don't know, talking about war or talking about something YouTube doesn't want me to talk about. I don't know, but I was going to thank Lulu Girl earlier, but then she left to go get cookie dough or something. I don't know. I have been reading a lot of the live comments, though, or how would I know that Lulu Girl went to get cookie dough? So anyway, thanks for all of that. And you can tell me which of the... I mean, I think Fox News had the most political coverage, but you saw all the different news summaries there. You can tell me which network you think did it best. And you also saw what I was talking about before, that there was no commentary on it from CNN, but I think Vladimir Zelenskyy in his interview with Fareed Zakaria was trying to do a little jujitsu on the starting of World War III concept, where, like, no, if the negotiations fail, that's going to start World War III. But anyway, you can let me know what you think about any of that in the comment section. And now I'm going to get to my final two newsmaker clips, which is kind of like the bad news, good news possibilities on Ukraine. I'm going to show you first the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, over on NBC News' Meet the Press yesterday, where Chuck Todd really tried to get him to draw a red line on the use of chemical weapons, how that would get NATO involved, maybe a no-fly zone, but he would not draw a red line. And I'll talk a little bit more about why I think the Secretary General of NATO would not say the use of chemical weapons is a red line that would cause NATO involvement in the war in Ukraine after we watch that clip together over here.
All allies.
You know, back in the mid-90s, there was a lot of talk. NATO was not going to intervene in what was happening in Central Europe until the humanitarian crisis got so bad that NATO ended up getting involved. Is a no-fly zone forever off the table in Ukraine, or would the use of chemical weapons make NATO rethink?
So, allies support Ukraine, but at the same time it is extremely important that we prevent this conflict becoming a full-fledged war between NATO and Russia, because that will cause much more damage, much more death, destruction than what we see now in Ukraine. Russia is a nuclear power. President Putin is now conveying very dangerous nuclear rhetoric, and therefore we are supporting Ukraine, but at the same time significantly increasing the military presence with troops on land, at sea and in the air. Germany, UK have doubled their presence in the Baltic countries, in their battle groups there. The US have now 100,000 troops in Europe, and there are tens of thousands of troops in the eastern part of the alliance, to send a message that escalation beyond Ukraine will be met with a very firm response from the whole alliance. And by doing that, we are preventing a conflict, not provoking a conflict in Europe.
Russia's use of chemical weapons, would that be considered, though, an escalation on his part that would make NATO rethink?
Our core responsibility is to protect 1 billion people living in 30 different NATO allied countries, and we are doing that by increasing the presence in the eastern part of the alliance. I also believe that regardless of how this conflict now ends, we are faced with a new reality, a new security reality, where Russia more openly contests core values for our security and are willing to use military force to achieve its objectives. And therefore, we need to reset our deterrence and defense. And one of the issues we start to discuss at the upcoming, at the summit of NATO leaders next week in Brussels, is how we do the more long-term adaptation, the long-term reset of our deterrence and defense.
All right. It does sound like what you're saying is you don't have an answer yet on what the use of chemical weapons would do to NATO's stance about Ukraine.
So any use of chemical weapons will be a blatant and brutal violation of international law, the ban on the use of chemical weapons. At the same time, we know that Russia has used chemical agents in Europe before against their own political opponents, and Russia has been facilitating, supporting the Assad regime in Syria, where chemical weapons has been used. So this is something we take extremely seriously. But at the same time, again, we are not, as we are very much aware of that we need to act in a way that prevents this conflict from going from being a very bloody, ugly, horrific conflict in Ukraine to something that turns out to be a full-fledged war between NATO and Russia in Europe, and also potentially involving, of course, the United States directly. That will be extremely dangerous, and that's is exactly what we need to prevent.
All right. Mr. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, appreciate you coming on and sharing NATO's perspective.
So yeah, there is Chuck Todd trying to get that answer from the Secretary General of NATO about whether the use of chemical weapons would be a red line that would cause NATO to get involved in the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and he wouldn't give that answer. And I don't know if that's like strategic ambiguity or what you want to call that, but I mean, I think it does make some sense as someone who studied military history and military strategy and grand strategy and Sun Tzu and Clausewitz and, you know, all the great military thinkers over the years, that drawing red lines like Obama did with Syria, and then he didn't follow up on the red line when Syria used chemical weapons, and then he got berated by Republicans for that for years, that he drew the red line and then didn't respond. But the thing about drawing a red line where you tell your opponent, if you do X, I will respond by doing Y, well, it actually gives your opponent control over your actions, and they can decide, okay, well, now that I know if I do X, he's going to do Y, I will wait until the most inopportune time for him to do Y, and I will do X because he's going to have to do Y. And it doesn't even matter what X and Y are in this equation, but that's why some strategic ambiguity is a little bit better. And actually, right after that interview with Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, Chuck Todd went on to an interview with Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, and he started by saying, that guy Jens Stoltenberg, he would not answer my question about drawing a red line on chemical weapons. And Chris Murphy, in a clip I'm not going to show you, I think came up with sort of a better formulation that said, the more, our response to what Russia does is going to be in proportion to how extreme their stuff is. The more extreme Russian actions are on the escalation scale, our response will be proportionate to that. So it threatens Russia with escalation for their escalation, but doesn't let them know exactly, if you do X, I'm going to do Y, so you can force me to do Y by doing X at the time of your choosing, which is never a good strategy if you can avoid it. So anyway, that's my commentary on that second to last newsmaker clip. That was sort of the bad news about the possibilities of escalation. This next, and like I said, final newsmaker clip is the ambassador to the United States from Poland. And let me see if I can pronounce his name. It's Marek Magierowski, maybe. And he is on with CNN's Jake Tapper, talking about his prime minister's proposal to help end the conflict in Ukraine by sending in some kind of peacekeeping force. But It's just a concept, and keep that in mind. It's just a concept in which, for the ambassador, means he cannot get ahead of his prime minister and give any more details, no matter how hard Jake Tapper presses him to explain exactly how that's going to work. But we're not going to know any more about how that's going to work at the end of the clip than at the beginning. But like I said, Jake Tapper tries valiantly in the final Newsmaker clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
We really appreciate it. Your prime minister says he intends to propose a peacekeeping mission, a NATO peacekeeping mission in Ukraine at this week's summit. What would that look like? What would be who would be part of that force? What exactly would they be doing in Ukraine?
It is understandably a preliminary concept which has been put on the table, a proposal which has to be considered by our NATO allies. And of course, in terms of international law, it will be complicated, as you probably imagine. But I believe we have to explore every option and every avenue to stop this aggression and this unprovoked war as quickly as possible. Of course, without engaging Russia in a direct military confrontation, because this is not the intent. But I think we should talk about all possibilities in order also to send a very clear signal to the Kremlin that NATO is determined to not only help the Ukrainians to defeat the Russian army, the aggressor on their soil, but also to defend our territorial integrity, our sovereignty, and our freedoms.
So I don't know how you would do that without engaging with the Russians. The Russians are attacking Ukraine. If a NATO peacekeeping mission goes in, it seems very likely. I mean, they're killing American journalists, not to mention Ukrainian children.
Nevertheless, it is a proposal which should be discussed.
Right, but wouldn't that automatically, I mean, if a NATO peacekeeping mission goes in, inevitably either they will engage with the Russians or the Russians will engage with them, and then you have Article 5.
It is like I said, it is a very preliminary concept. It doesn't need to be a peacekeeping mission under the cover of NATO. NATO does not need to engage in this kind of operation. Anyway, I believe that the upcoming NATO summit in Brussels next week will be a great opportunity to talk about all these possibilities and options and proposals which are now on the table, how to deter Russia, also in a longer term.
Yeah, presumably Polish troops would be part of such a mission.
Well, Polish troops are, we are willing and ready to help the Ukrainians as much as possible, and again, within the framework of NATO cooperation, to defend themselves. Again, we are not talking about possible escalation and possible engagement of NATO troops in Ukraine. I fully agree with most Polish and Western politicians who say that it would be too escalatory. But anyway, we have to be very adamant that if Russia escalates and if this war is protracted in the longer term, we have to be ready to defend NATO territory. Like President Biden said in his State of the Union address, we are ready to defend every inch of NATO territory. We are ready to defend every NATO member country. And that's why we should be also discussing numerous possibilities of defending ourselves, not only Ukraine.
Right. But just to be clear, you're talking about Polish troops without question in Ukraine.
No, I'm not talking about Polish
as part of a NATO peacekeeping mission.
I have to repeat this for the third time. It's just a preliminary concept. We can't take any decisions unilaterally, even as NATO member state. All such decisions, no matter how radical they seem to be now, have to be taken by all NATO member states.
Okay, well, we look forward to hearing more details about this plan. Just a few days ago, Ukraine's military said that they shot down
So did you get that? It's only a preliminary concept, and he wouldn't answer any details despite Jake Tapper's valiant effort, as I kind of pre-criticized that clip, although I guess there's been a little bit more news on that since yesterday when that interview happened, that it's sort of a proposal to not have NATO troops, but some of the NATO members, like the Poland and Slovakia, or who were the three presidents who went and visited Zelenskyy in Kyiv, and like maybe some of those more local NATO members might send in peacekeeping troops after, to enforce a ceasefire, or I don't know. We'll have to see what happens there. But anyway, that was sort of a preview of what we might be seeing at this NATO-EU summit that Biden is attending, or maybe, like Jake Tapper said in his State of the Union, it's all about the photo op and not really about the substance. That, as they say in the news business all the time, remains to be seen. Remains to be seen. I don't know. I suppose it's possible I could try to do a clip roundup on Friday about well, I don't know. Actually, I have a couple meetings on Friday, but I wanted to do some more coverage of the Ketanji Brown Jackson nomination. I almost showed you a clip of Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn. I even captured the whole clip of her statement. Almost all the people criticizing Ketanji Brown Jackson, the Republicans, they were all white men except one. The last person to go, Marsha Blackburn, they have a woman. They've got a woman, so they brought her in so she wasn't quite as stark in terms of identity politics and her attacks. But she had the weirdest attack where she started off being nice and saying nice things about her children who were attending the hearing, but also, oh, you're soft on child pornographers, soft on crime, and want to take away parental rights, and want to, I don't know, all these weird, most of the attacks I think we're going to be hearing all week were in Marsha Blackburn's statement. Although Josh Hawley did talk about some 7 cases where Ketanji Brown Jackson had sentenced child pornographers or people who possess child pornography to below the sentencing guideline range and below what the prosecutor asked for. But there's a lot of evidence that the sentencing guidelines on child pornography don't really differentiate between people who possess images on their hard drives versus people who actually distribute or create child pornography. And those are different crimes. Even possessing child pornography is not great. And if you listen to what Josh Hawley, he was talking about people who still got years and years in federal prison, just not as many years as the prosecutor asked for. But I think we're going to hear more about being soft on child pornography, soft on crime, and I don't know. Marsha Blackburn also talked about critical race theory and white privilege, teaching people about white privilege and woke kindergarten, something about woke kindergarten. So that might come up again. So I don't know. If I have time, I might do another live stream before next Monday about the Ketanji Brown Jackson nomination, since I do have some special qualifications to talk about it apparently. But if not, I will be back next Monday and every Monday, hopefully through the November midterm elections. And I did have a bonus Dash clip for the Dash fans out there, since we're still kind of mourning Sandy. But, Sandy, my dog, was usually my one live studio audience member right over there. And Dash has really kind of stepped up. And the only thing is, Dash is not quite as patient as Sandy. Sandy would come in, lie down, and be there almost the whole show. Dash will come in briefly and make an appearance. And I think it was during you'll hear the ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary in the background during this clip. You'll see it. It happened right over there during this live stream. Where you can see Dash taking on the Sandy role of being the live studio audience over here.
Peace talks with Putin. The war enters its 4th week with more killing and more questions. No clarity at all on how the conflict ends or what the ultimate cost will be. Our senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell starts us off from Kyiv, which could soon face the biggest urban battle since World War II. Good morning, Ian.
That's right. So you did see Dash was over there just to my left, taking on Sandy's role as the live studio audience. I can't say that he's there now, because like I said, just doesn't have the patience that Sandy did. Sandy was a saint. Well, you know, that's, I guess everybody becomes a saint after they die, or becomes more of a saint anyway. But we miss Sandy, but I'm still happy to have Dash to fulfill that role. And until next Monday, or until I upload some other type of live stream, maybe like I said, a Ketanji Brown Jackson hearing clip roundup or something, that might happen. Otherwise, until next Monday, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.